This video is over our test review for turning decimals into fractions. For our first problem, we have the number 0.45. So we're going to start by making this into a fraction. Remember, with decimals, the first place value is the tenths. The second place value is the hundredths. And so when we write our fraction, we write it as 45 over 100 because it's in the hundredths place value. Now, we always want to simplify our fractions, so I can divide both the numerator and the denominator by 5. 45 divided by 5 would give us 9. 100 divided by 5 would give us 20. 9 over 20 is our simplified fraction. For number 2, we have the decimal point 0.18, which is repeating. Just like I mentioned before, the first place value is known as the tenths, that's the 1. The second place value is known as the hundredths, that's the 8. So normally we would write this fraction as 18 over 100 because it's in the hundredths place value. But because it's repeating, we change it from 100 to 99. Remember, repeating decimals get written over nines. However, we still always want to simplify our fractions, and so I can divide both the numerator and the denominator by 9. 18 divided by 9 is 2. 99 divided by 9 is 11. 2 over 11 is our simplified fraction. For number 3, we have the decimal point 0.3. As I mentioned before, the first place value is known as the tenths place. So when we write our fractional answer, we write it as a fraction of 3 over 10. We cannot simplify 3 over 10 because no number goes into 3 and 10 evenly, and so the fraction answer stays 3 over 10. Number 4. We have the decimal 0.95. The first place value, the 9, is the tenths place. The second place value, the 5, is the hundredths place. We write our fraction as 95 over 100 because we're in the hundredths place. We want to simplify that fraction. I can divide both 95 and 100 by 5. 95 divided by 5 is 19. 100 divided by 5 is 20. 19 over 20 is my final simplified fraction. For our next problem, number 5, we have the decimal point 0.8. The first decimal place is known as the tenths place. So when we write our fraction, we write it as 8 over 10 because that's our place value. In order to simplify the fraction, we divide both the numerator and the denominator by 2. 8 divided by 2 is going to give us 4. 10 divided by 2 is going to give us 5. 4/5 is our final simplified fraction. For number 6, we have the decimal point 0.63 repeating. The first place value is known as the tenths. The second place value, that's the 3, is known as the hundredths. Normally, we would write this problem as 63 over 100 because we're in the hundredths place value. But because it's repeating, we change that 100 and we write it as 99. All repeating decimals get written over nines. Now, we always want to simplify our fractions, and so we can divide 63 and 99 by 9. 63 divided by 9 is 7. 99 divided by 9 is 11. 7 over 11 is our final simplified fraction. For number 7, we have the decimal point 0.54. Just as I mentioned before, the first place value, the 5, is known as the tenths place. The second place value, the 4, is known as the hundredths place. We set up our fraction as 54 over 100, but because this is a repeating decimal, all repeating decimals get changed and written over nines. So that 100 in the denominator changes to a 99. We always want to simplify our fractions, so we can divide both 54 and 99 by 9. 54 divided by 9 is 6. 99 divided by 9 is 11. 6 over 11 is our final simplified fraction. For number 8, we have the decimal point 0.125. The first place value is known as the tenths, that's the 1. The second place value, that's the 2, is known as the hundredths. And the third place value, which is the 5, is known as the thousandths. We start by writing our fraction as 125 over 1,000, because that's the place value that we're in. And then we want to simplify. I can divide both 125 and 1,000 by 5. 125 divided by 5 gives me 25. 1,000 divided by 5 gives me 200. We can simplify this fraction again. We can divide both 25 and 200 by 5. 25 divided by 5 is 5. 200 divided by 5 is 40. We can simplify this fraction again. I can divide 5 and 40 by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 40 divided by 5 is 8. 1 over 8 is our final simplified fraction. For number 9, we have the decimal point 0.83 with only the 3 repeating. Now, this is one of our complicated problems because it's a repeating decimal, but since only part of the number is repeating, we have to solve it in a different method. We can't just write it over nines. What we do is we rewrite our problem. So we would normally move the decimal point till it is behind the number. So we would move it till it is behind the 8, right in front of the repeating decimal. And we can know that by multiplying by 10. It's what that is known as. And so this number is now 8.3 repeating, which we have multiplied by 10. Remember, we're going to do it again. We take our original number, 8.83 repeating, and we move the decimal to the back. Because we moved it 2 times is multiplying by 100. So my new decimal is 83.3 repeating. And again, that means that we're multiplying by 100. If we subtract the numbers 83 minus 8, we end up getting 75. And then 110 we can subtract to get 90. We use those answers, 75 and 90, to make our fraction. We want to finalize our fraction by simplifying it, so we can divide both the numerator and the denominator by 5. 75 divided by 5 is 15. 90 divided by 5 is 18. We're not finished. We can divide both the numerator and the denominator by 3. 15 divided by 3 is 5. 18 divided by 3 is 6. 5 over 6 is our final simplified fraction. For number 10, we have the decimal point 0.90 repeating. The 9 is in the tenths place. The 0 is in the hundredths place. And so when we write our fraction, we would write it as 90 over 100. But because it's repeating, all repeating decimals get written over nines, so that 100 changes to a 99. Now we want to take that answer and we want to simplify the fraction. I can divide both the numerator and the denominator by 9. 90 divided by 9 is 10. 99 divided by 9 is 11. 10 over 11 is my final simplified fraction. For number 11, we have the decimal point 0.28. The 0.2 is in the tenths place, and the 8 is in the hundredths place. We start by taking our decimal and writing it over 100 because that's the place value that we're in. We want to simplify this fraction. They're even numbers, so we can divide both of them by 2. 28 divided by 2 is 14. 100 divided by 2 is 50. Both of those numbers are still even, so we can again divide them by 2. 14 divided by 2 is 7. 50 divided by 2 is 25. 7 over 25 is our final simplified fraction. For number 12, we have the decimal point 0.1 repeating. The 1 is in the place value of the tenths place. So we would write our fraction as 1 over 10. But because it's a repeating decimal, we write it over 9s. And so 1 over 9 is going to be our final simplified fraction. For number 13, we have the decimal point 0.3 repeating. The 3 is in the tenths place, so we would write that as 3 over 10. But because it's repeating, remember repeating decimals get written over 9s, so we change that 10 into a 9. However, we always want to simplify our fractions. We can simplify the 3 and the 9 by dividing by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 9 divided by 3 is 3. 1/3 is our final simplified fraction. For number 14, we have the decimal point 0.16 with only the 6 repeating. Now remember, this is one of our challenging decimal problems. In order to change it from a decimal into a fraction, we need to move the decimal point. So the first time that we move the decimal point, we move it till it's between the repeating number and the non-repeating number. We only need to move it one time, and moving it one time is the same as multiplying by 10. And so we use the 1.6 repeating and the multiplying by 10 to find our answer. Now, the second time that we move the decimal point, we move it to the back of the number. So that would be 2 times. Moving the decimal 2 times is the same as multiplying by 100. So we now have 16, which we've multiplied by 100. To find the numbers for the fraction, we subtract. When you subtract 16 and 1, we get 15. When you subtract 110, we get 90. Our fraction becomes 15 over 90. However, we're not finished. We always want to simplify our fraction. We can divide the top and the bottom numbers by 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3. 90 divided by 5 is 18. We're going to simplify it again. We can divide the numerator and the denominator by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 18 divided by 3 is 6. 1/6 is our final simplified fraction. For number 15, we have the decimal point 0.85. The 8 is in the tenths place, and the 5 is in the hundredths place. We start by writing our fraction as 85 over 100 because that's the place value that we're in. We can simplify this fraction by dividing the numerator and the denominator by 5. 85 divided by 5 is 17. 100 divided by 5 is 20. 17 over 20 is our final simplified fraction. For number 16, we have the decimal point 0.4 repeating. 4 is in the tenths place, and so we would start by writing our fraction as 4 over 10. But because it's repeating decimals get written over 9s, so we change the 10 into a 9. And our final answer is 4/9. We cannot simplify that fraction because no number goes into 4 and 9 evenly. For number 17, we have the decimal point 0.875. The 8 is in the tenths place. The 7 is in the hundredths place. And the 5 is in the thousandths place. So when we write our fraction, we write it as 875 over 1,000, because that's the place value that we're in. To simplify the fraction, we can divide both of them by 5. 875 divided by 5 is 175. 1,000 divided by 5 is 200. We can simplify that fraction again, dividing both numbers by 5. 175 divided by 5 is 35. 200 divided by 5 is 40. We can simplify that fraction again. We divide both numbers by 5. 35 divided by 5 is 7. 40 divided by 5 is 8. 7/8 is our final simplified fraction. For number 18, we have the decimal point 0.25. The 0.2 is in the tenths place, and the 5 is in the hundredths place. We start by writing our fraction as 25 over 100, because that's the place value that we're in. And then in order to simplify it, we can divide both the numerator and the denominator by 5. 25 divided by 5 is 5. 100 divided by 5 is 20. We can simplify that fraction again by dividing both the numerator and the denominator by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 20 divided by 5 is 4. 1/4 is our final simplified fraction. For number 19, we have the decimal point 0.42 with the 2 repeating. Remember, this is a complicated fraction because only part of the number is repeating. In order to write it as a fraction, we're going to move the decimal point. The first time we move the decimal point, we want to move it between the numbers. Since we only move it one time, that's the same as multiplying by 10. And so we use the 4.2 and the times 10 to help us find our answer later. The second time that we move the decimal point, we move it to the back. That means we have to move it 2 times. Moving it 2 times means we're multiplying by 100. So we use the 42.2 repeating and the times 100 to find our answer. If we subtract our values, 42 minus 4 is going to give us 38, and 100 minus 10 is going to give us 90. So 38 over 90 starts off our fraction. Now we can simplify that fraction because both the numerator and the denominator are even, so we can divide by 2. 38 divided by 2 is 19. 90 divided by 2 is 45. 19 over 45 is our final simplified fraction. For our last problem, we have the decimal point 0.4. The 0.4 is in the tenths place. So we write our fraction as 4 over 10. Both of those numbers are even, so we can divide by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 5. 10 divided by 2 is 5. And so 2/5 is our final simplified fraction.